Hey, Burns. Well, okay, so you know the original plan was just to make one of my usual faster clocks, edited text above heads, quick jokes, look at the cool gameplay. Ended up making a review because I was so disappointed and I wanted to save others the time of playing it. Big mod, 35 hours, time is money. Now you can't play it. The Frontier is gone. What a day it has been. I was out water skiing when I got the news that the Frontier was kill, and by the time I got home, not only has large parts of the dev team left, but the mod has been pulled off the Nexus, by the dev team, mind you. The plan as stated on the Discord is a removal of a lot of the content, specifically the ones that people are complaining about, and the developer who caused this uproar, who we will get into later. In addition, some voice actors and an artist have requested their content be removed from the mod. Once this has been done, it will be uploaded as a final version of the Nexus and left there. I suppose this makes original copies rare now. Keep your Flappy Bird installed. The Steam version is reportedly being completed as well, from all the reports that I've seen and the screenshots that I've gotten. A pre-word before we really begin. There is a lot of misinformation being passed around, particularly photoshopped images and fake claims. I'm going to do my best to collate the information that has come out about the mod, and I'll mark where I'm unsure verbally. For instance, these two images are definitely fake. These are photoshops easily proven false by a search on their Discord. I'm going to go by categories grouped up as best I can. I have basically been shotgunned by information, and will try my best to get this video out tonight. I've been contacted by and contacted various people involved in the mod, those who have been on in the past and present, and the team lead himself, TG Spy. I will be keeping names private where requested. In the event I do get something wrong, please feel free to correct me in the comments, and as soon as I'm awake, I will be pinning a comment with any corrections. But I don't believe many others, save for the lead himself, have such a diverse range of information as I now have. We'll start with easy mode and get on to harder topics as we go on. Devil's Wish. This is the simplest topic and the one that interested me the most when I first started asking questions to those who came forwards to me. Devil's Wish was the magician behind the NCR main quest campaign, and unfortunately, also the writer. To sum up what I've learnt before I go into details below, the NCR main quest at the start of development was essentially the entire mod. The rest of the side quests and the other two main quests were then built around it, which also meant that they had to fit to what the NCR main quest decided. For instance, the Enclave existing and having a space station was all part of the NCR main quest, so the Legion and Crusaders had to address it. Chapter 1 and Chapter 3 were actually the first content of the NCR main quest to be finished, Chapter 3 being the space station, and Chapter 1 the Call of Duty experience with being captured by the Legion, the Buckman Stadium assault, the like. The primary conflict with Devil's Wish in the mod-making team was that he had his own vision for his own content and he didn't want others touching it. Even things as simple as balancing armor values was seen as a struggle, and the project lead TG Spy stated that he had near zero control over Devil's Wish. How much control did you actually have over Devil's Wish as a project lead? None? Okay.
None.
Fair enough.
So the most control I had over him was suggesting balance changes for very minor things.
I've heard those were difficult to get through too. The problem being, of course, that if it came to the rest of the team telling Devils to leave, he would leave with the core content of the mod, and of course his rather extensive scripting ability. It would essentially gut the mod. One insider told me that during the QA process, the main focus and what was encouraged was only improving performance and bug fixing, not doing anything with the balance or with the story. Now we'll get into the individual notes I've gotten from many different people that may come in the most disjointed order possible. Welcome to them. First of all, a lot of the NCR main quest has been agreed to by almost everyone I've spoken to be a modder's flex. It is essentially a way of showing off the absolute capability of the engine and the skill of the modder himself, and the story, of course, took the back seat. In the first dream sequence, and you get wiggled at, by the by, someone called that the unfriendly wiggle, and that was the funniest thing I've heard all day. It's now tomorrow, and it's still the funniest thing I've heard all day. Devils changed the model last minute, which broke the movement and caused the wiggle. It was originally intended to be a dead money model, that being one of the ghost people. That same insider told me that the second dream sequence, when you're being chased and had to find the various parts of your brain, you originally had no light. The ghost sequence after you fall out of the helicopter apparently changed quite massively between my playing of it and the insider that I spoke to who played it. In their version, there was only occasional ghosts, and when you walked up to them, you could see their names, so you actually know who you were looking at. The general idea of the scene, to explain why there's ghosts everywhere, was that the courier was dying and was basically in between worlds. Hardcase, already dead at this point, then guides the courier up to the radio and leads them to safety. It was also meant to utilize Frost, a mechanic cut from the mod. Frost was equivalent to radiation in the base game except for freezing, so if you're wearing the wrong clothes, you start to freeze to death. Devil's Wish made the flashback Helios 1 scene and the zoom out. An insider told me that they couldn't get rid of the massive zoom out without breaking the entire flashback. This is a direct quote from one of the insiders. When QA started, the Chapter 1 NCR main quest had less performance issues than it did on release, because an inexperienced member of the team bug-fixed something somewhere that caused CTDs. There are lots of contradictions between the story placed on the website about what's happening with the NCR and the actual mod itself. Some characters in the Brotherhood and NCR flashback scene still mention this original website story. When I asked TG about this, he said that writing on the mod was continuing quite close up to release, with Devil's Wish being the only NCR writer. There have been accusations of this mod using stolen assets. Now, there are 3 different things I will immediately address here, as they're all covered. Any stalker assets are actually free to use, according to every insider I've spoken to. Call of Duty sounds are fine for non-paid projects as well. However, there was one actual stolen asset in the game. Devil's Wish had a pentagram stolen from Doom 3 put into one of his missions. Before I continue on to talk more about the Doom 3 asset, I think you can see why I believe this to be the core issue with the mod's writing. One person essentially had control of the wheel, and unfortunately, that one person was not a good writer. The team was left in an awkward position where they weren't able to remove the person, and they weren't able to get someone else to change their content, as the modder wouldn't agree to it. The next person of interest is Rikku, someone who I spoke to personally. I do have to mention his name here, as what I'm about to talk about will immediately reveal who he is anyway. It's important to note that there was a lot of drama within the mod team. That led to some of the people coming forward to talk to me. It also somewhat impressively puts me in the position of neutral arbitrator, because I'm just simply going to say what I've been told, and then comment on that stuff at the end. I've spoken to people who vehemently hate each other. I have seen screen caps of people being incredibly unnice to each other. But I'm going to try and keep it as focused as possible to actually mod making decisions and things that have affected the development of the mod or the outcome. On with the Doom 3 asset. If you aren't aware, having a stolen asset in your mod is a massive no-go on the Nexus. The timeline as explained to me by an insider goes thusly. Devil's Wish uses the Doom 3 asset in the mod. The team notices and makes a replacement pentagram. The replacement is either not implemented or implemented and then replaced by Devil's Wish. The mod releases. 4chan and other sites notice the asset. Rikku, this being one of the ex-devs at this point no longer working with the team, investigates and does indeed find the asset. Here is where there is a disagreement. The mod team says that Rikku acted against them by bringing this up in a public channel, that being the Screenshots channel, asking if they know if assets from Doom 3 are good to use in mods. Rikku then DM'd the information to Mac, one of the modders working on the team, and it was removed from the mod. It's important to note here that there is already animosity between Rikku and the rest of the mod team at this point. They see this post as a jab at the mod, a way to bring it down, because of course, were it revealed that there were stolen assets, it would be taken off the Nexus. Personally, it doesn't look malicious to me. I've already had Hanlon's razor quoted at me today. I will quote it again if needed. The fact that it was then brought to DMs instead of being posted in the Screenshot channel is what I believe shows the intent there. However, this led to some team members, specifically in this case Zalandro, becoming displeased with Rikku. After this message, Rikku was banned from the Discord. I believe you can see how someone reporting a stolen asset in the mod and then immediately being banned doesn't look good for the team. TG specifically argued that this is a continuation of an ongoing issue, with the team disliking Rikku, Rikku disliking the team. Not my place to decide, this is just what I know. Further notes is that Rikku was not credited on the mod's website according to the Wayback Machine, which I have to use as the mod's website has been changed right now. It contains only the message regarding the member we will soon talk about. The only crediting in the mod is his character in the dev room and the cells with his tag on them. Rikku created 2 things of note. The first is the deathclaw joke. I'm sure you've all heard of it now, but if you haven't, there is a deathclaw in the Frontier which you can go into its cave and have sex with. However, you can't because, as I will try and explain in just a second, first of all, it was meant to be Wild Wasteland, and secondly, the quest is actually broken. It is, as explained, definitely a joke. All of the responses of which they are many are meant to be jokes, and of course it's meant to be a Wild Wasteland silly moment. What's meant to happen when you sleep with the Deathclaw is you're meant to wake up with all of your limbs broken. Instead, what actually happens is that you get ... and then nothing happens and the Deathclaw disappears. This will be a continuing fact as we go on. Many things in this mod were meant to be marked as Wild Wasteland, but never were. One more note about Rikku, and this is something I actually found out before I even spoke to him, because I saw his mod on the Nexus. Rikku made the mission Sword Stone Tower. It was essentially a Cthulhu-style side quest in which you went into a tower and went through a spooky quest. He made this before he left the mod, and it stayed in the mod after he left. However, changes were then made to it. TG Spy changed and removed one of the scares. In the filing cabinet room, it's meant to turn on a radio that plays the song Begin Again from Dead Money. Gonna ask you a little bit of a harder question now. Why were the changes made to Rikku's quest?
The changes were made to Rikku's quest that were made were made because we had a significant overusage of a certain song from Dead Money, the Begin Again song.
Yeah.
That was the major change we made, specifically to remove that song from the entire mod because it was so egregiously used that we didn't feel it was necessary to use it any further.
The quest reward was also changed. You're meant to get a sword and a mask. The mask now only spawns on Wild Wasteland, and the sword also only spawns on Wild Wasteland. If you're not on Wild Wasteland, you get an alternate sword. In addition to this change to the quest reward, actually broke an elevator door near there. Riku's mod, released soon after the Frontier released, basically changes his quest back to the way it originally was. Whether you think it's right or not to change someone else's mission, especially when you dislike that person, one important thing to note here is that TG Spy was seen in different lights by different people. As I'll say later, before I spoke to the man myself, I had reports of him being a very good project lead and a very nice man, lovely person to work with, to quite the opposite. Let's touch on the hotbed for a moment, shall we? The character of America. First of all, America was never underaged. The 18-year-old birthday card was added later on in development. I will say that I do think it was a terrible idea. There are other ways you can portray a character's age without making it seem so sleazy. The dev who made America, that being Odin, said that the birthday card is old, she could be older, and it's left up to interpretation. One thing noted with America that was odd was that you needed to pass speech checks in order to be a horrible piece of shit to her. According to an insider, this was actually a joke by the dev Odin. The idea was to catch out those who simply click on speech checks without actually reading what they do. The assumption in Fallout normally is that a speech check is always a good thing. So you click on the speech check, talk absolute shit to her, and then all the Crusaders hate you and shoot you right on the spot. Both myself and the insider agreed it's a bad joke, specifically because it needs to be explained. Unless you're operating on the exact same wavelength as the modder and you immediately guess that the idea was to catch you out into pressing a bad speech option, what it instead ends up feeling like is you choose a speech option to be rude, which is weird to begin with, and then everyone kills you because you shit-talked this creator's character. The joke doesn't carry well. A direct quote here from one of the insiders in regard to America herself. I know the people who wrote it, I played it, I made my opinions clear on the topic. I don't think it was written with the intent of being sexual. I just don't think that's being fair to the people who made the mod. Can't defend the feet line. Quite curiously, I'm the exact opposite. I feel the feet line is far easier to defend than the my little slave girl line.
I don't think it was written intended to be that way. It was just written intended to be as evil as it could be because it's the most evil thing you could do.
Actually, there is one question here. I don't know if it was just a strange line. This is something again from the interview. You said there were no sex slaves in the mod. You then immediately afterwards brought up America, specifically. Did you just mean that as in specifically America is not a sex slave, or there was no sex slaves at all in the mod?
Specifically, America was not a sex slave. There are sex slaves in the Ostia dungeons.
Yes.
However, because that was sort of a concept that's been present since Fallout 3, I didn't think that was really, something that worth merit. A lot of people have been misconstruing the America lines as turning her into a sex slave, but that is not true.
To say a line back to you from earlier, it is what is written. There is calling someone your little slave girl, and then she responds with, yeah, okay, I'll put in the collar master. Yeah. There's very few contexts in which that functions. So it's now unfortunately time to mention Zoo. I'm not going into the full thing yet, but Zoo is indeed the pedo on the team. The reason I'm bringing him up here is because it seemed he did have a hand in editing America's dialogue. This screenshot seems to imply that Zoo did work on the dialogue for America. Fail all in this case is referring to the idea that picking this option will fail all of the quests in the quest line, in the same sort of way that killing a major character in New Vegas would. The claim I have heard second-hand from Odin is that he believes that Zoo may have punched up, as in made more sexual, the dialogue of America. Now, the only evidence we have for this is Odin's claim himself and this single screenshot which references Zoo editing a fail segment on a different dialogue option. Of course, the easy thing would be to simply say that the pedo did everything, point at the pedo, kick the pedo out, and clean your own hands. Is it convenient? Is it true? I don't know. I provided the information, and that's pretty much all I can do.
We were talking in the server, and Odin's World mentioned something. Odin's World being the person making the Crusaders faction, the all the Crusaders, NPCs, America, etc., where basically Zoo had gone through a few weeks ago and had like punched up the dialogue there.
You mean Zoo rather had changed, for instance, like the slave dialogue and stuff? Is that what you're saying?
That's what we think, because Odin's World doesn't remember writing that dialogue specifically, and Zoo had gone through and changed quite a bit of like at least in terms of the player dialogue boxes.
I know, without proof, that seems weird.
It's very convenient.
It is incredibly convenient that the revealed pedophile just happened to change the dialogue a few weeks ago, sort of thing.
Which is specifically why I went and checked myself, and I could find no changes to the player prompts in any of these dialogues, which is,
Just to cap it off and confirm, Odin was the one who made the Crusader main quest line. Next, we'll be talking about Nazo, who made the Legion main quest line, and specifically one character made by Nazo. As a side note, the sex lizards were made by Nazo. The character I specifically want to talk about is May. I'm going to play you some of her lines.
I'm May, by the way. Professional failure. When I'm not hanging out with Chloe or climbing the overpass, I'm here drawing porn. Occasionally non-porn, but mostly porn. I'd be willing to give you some if I had any, but Chloe always gets them first. Friend privileges. Duh. Besides people stealing our caps, nothing happens here. One of these days, I'm going out into the wastes, and then I can have drugs and do sex. Wow, really? Greg's sick? I could never have guessed. Thank you for telling me this, kind stranger. Please, take my virginity as your reward. My brother is always sick. Something to do with his immune system. Mom and Dad are making a big deal over nothing, as usual.
I think you can see why there really is far more issue to be taken with May rather than with America. There is a really important note here. In her text line, which was written first, she says, "When I'm 18, I will go out to do drugs and have sex." Her voice actor, however, says,
"One of these days, I'm going out into the wastes, and then I can have drugs and do sex."
From everyone I've spoken to, they've said it's likely that the voice acting department, which was their own group, changed this line. Things like this are apparently relatively common. The result was the dialogue was not then updated, and the line was published as is. Whilst that may seem fine, the problem is that this implies that at some point, there was a written character who is underage, who draws porn, offers to give you her virginity, and talks about doing drugs and sex. To touch on TG real quick, people have continually asked how he doesn't know what was in the mod or how he's surprised by these things appearing. One insider said that TG was mainly focused on bug fixing and not on dialogue. He didn't really pay attention to it unless it was actually a bug. The direct quote goes, "TG Spy spent thousands of hours in the GEC bug fixing." The GEC being Fallout's mod maker, essentially. A lot of things go by you when you spend that much time bug fixing. He left the dialogue to the mod makers making the quests and the voice acting department. So when the changes come to characters like May, it was probably the voice acting department. This is where we'll leave May for now. Let's talk about Zoo. He was outed as a pedo. If you want to look into it, you can go do that. I won't be talking any more about it in this video. I'll only be talking about what he actually did in relations to the mod. Firstly, he was primarily an artist. He made icons, specifically the Pip-Boy icons. He made no actual gameplay in the mod, with the only in-game additions being the plushie and the Securitron of his person in the dev room. A direct quote follows. The interaction with Zoo was he'd come around every few months, drop a bunch of images that he was requested to make, and when we were in the QA phase, he edited some armors and weapons. He was very quiet in public chats, but spoke in the dev chats, was silent in voice chats. End quote. This is a quote relayed to me secondhand by an insider, so there may be less validity to this. However, it was reported that one of the devs said that Zoo needs to go and remove his self-insert because we're not having self-inserts outside of the mod room. The mod room in this case referring to the developer room, in which the developers all have their own characters that can talk to you. I'd like to speak a little bit more about the mod's production next. One discussion with one of the insiders brought up the fact that they weren't trying to make a DLC. They were actually just loads of individuals sort of stitching their mods together. While you may think of a mod team as working from the top down with the project lead deciding on everything, that was not the way the Frontier worked. One of these insiders then said the problem was that it was presented that way as a cohesive project or a Fallout sort of style DLC, obviously not actually paid. They state it was never meant to be lore-friendly. When I questioned why then there was workshop tags saying it was lore-friendly and why there was statements on the website saying it was lore-friendly, they replied with, "I do not know about," and "I do not work here. Thanks." TG Spy, on the other hand, said, if you'll forgive me for paraphrasing here, that it was lore-friendly in 2 of the 3 campaigns. It goes without saying that the NCR main quest steps wrong, and how it was an essential trickle-down in that the other campaigns had to redress. For instance, in the Crusaders campaign, you nuke the space station instead of going there, and in the Legion campaign, it literally blows up off-screen while you're in a bar. TG asserted that while the Exiles don't fit to Fallout lore, things like the Northern Legion and the Crusaders do. I'd also like to talk about the voice acting for just a moment. There was only 3 paid voice actors in the whole mod. Those were Blackthorn, Domina, and Valorous. I won't tell you how much they were paid, but it was a small amount. Ray Chase, the voice of Tiberius Rancor, actually volunteered to voice in the mod. He had 2 requests, though. First, he wanted to voice the villain, and second, he wanted to wear sunglasses all the time. My notes here continue with, what a Chad. We've touched on the mod's production, the dev team's worst member, the internal strife within the dev team itself, the primary issue with the building of the mod, and that being why people could never edit the story, or why everything had to dance to the tune of the NCR main quest. We've talked about the assets, we've talked about America, and personally the far more egregious May. Now, we talk about TG Spy himself. If you don't know, TG Spy is the project lead, for the Frontier. He stepped back after everything that happened, but was very kind to speak to me in person. You may wonder why I saved him for last, because first, I wasn't actually ever expecting to speak with him. That entirely came about by accident when I was speaking with someone else and they just brought him into the call. I have nothing but respect for the guts it takes to jump into a Discord call for the guy whose video frankly became the face of people who hate the mod and just talk to me. If you're unaware, my video was shared quite a bit on V, which is something I wasn't even aware of. To the devs at least, I was seen as the main person against the mod. I have spoken with some devs who, to use a simple term, shit-talked me, and got on good terms soon after.
I'm really cool with however you want this.
I'll be entirely honest, we're not starting off on the best of foots. I don't particularly enjoy being called a juvenile ass with a bunch of followers. Does feel like you're just trying to use me.
When are you making more space engineer, Remy? When are you making more space
I'm never making more space engineer. Call me when Starbase is done. But TG Spy from the get-go was exceedingly professional in a situation in which anyone would be forgiven for simply screaming into their microphone. More to that, I can definitely relate to pouring effort into something that fails. Many of my armor ops have ended that way. What I can't imagine is pouring effort in not for 1 or 2 weeks, but for 7 years. It's not to say that I agree with him on everything, and I think he's an infallible human that can't do any wrong. There's definitely areas in which I think he did wrong, but like a Greek tragedy, I don't think this spiderweb could have been easily untangled and done right. In fact, before I spoke to him, he seemed from the information I'd gathered to be a right bastard, but from speaking to him I can't help but feel for him, and he brought forth corrections and new information to various elements, some of which you've already heard. He took incredibly blunt questions right on the nose, specifically in regards to the infighting within the team. It's always important to remember that there is always 2 sides to any conversation, which is why I'm trying my best to show the both of them. If you aren't aware, he went on a live stream at the start of today with Tyler McVicker from the ex-Valve News Network. It was an interview, basically in regards to the Frontier. He only started the interview about 20 minutes after he woke up, and he'd only found out about Zoo, the pedo, at that same time. He then went on the live stream, which was of course rated by people out for blood, and I'll be entirely honest, I have no idea who Tyler McVicker is, but that was possibly some of the most painful interviewing I've ever had to listen to. He would literally read any question sent in, and when I say question, I don't mean questions. Why do you think the Enclave is even bad, you stinky poo-poo? And then he would pause as if expecting TG to answer. This continued for quite a while, including 4chan getting him to say lots of various questionable things, anti-Semitic and the sort. I don't think it was a good idea for TG to have gone on it. The original project lead was mostly mad. You may also know them as Maybe Next Time, which was the YouTube channel that you can find the Only Human original on, which has since been parodied. From talking to most people, it seemed his primary role was far more bug fixing and QA than it was actually project leading. There was mentions of donations to charity on the live stream, and I questioned a little bit more about that. The answer I was simply given was that there was leftover money from the Patreon, and since that was no longer needed, since the project was over, it was given straight to charity. If you've been following the mod at all by now, you have probably heard the fascist power fantasy and Trump supporter line in regards to Legion and the Enclave, rather. Who was the other person you were talking to on that stream?
That was the first development stream that we did.
Okay.
The first day the mod came out, and it was... I don't remember who said it, but I was on the stream with a few of the other developers.
One important note is that the Enclave guy that you can talk to, the one you can tell that you don't want to join a fascist paramilitary group that is objectively evil, is also meant to be Wild Wasteland. As a note, that's a fake recruiter. If you agree with him, he takes all your stuff and knocks you out. If you tell him that the Enclave are wanted, he's like, oh yes, Patriot. Well then, thank you for telling me, I'll give you my uniform. And then he gives you his uniform and wanders off. If it was actually Wild Wasteland, this mod would have probably not suffered anything near as much flack. So many things I've brought up have been, oh shit, that was meant to be Wild Wasteland, but it simply wasn't set. A last note before we get into the final stages about the size of the team. The team was never actually as big as it seems. The voice acting team was quite big, but of course they were just voice actors, and they were actually segmented away and not allowed to know too much about the game itself after an earlier leak with a voice actor who had his role recast. I will now read a quote from one of the insiders. When QA started, the mod was content complete except for the end quest of the Crusaders and the NCR. Everything else was QA, but the QA phase was pretty much done by TG Spy and occasionally 1 to 2 other mod developers, but not consistently. Major changes and fixes to the mod were not going to happen because the team was gone. Believe it or not, despite our positions, TG and I left off on a pretty good note. As an outsider looking in, he was a good man to talk to. 2 notes. What really went wrong? I think the biggest thing is that no single issue likely would have sunk this mod. Yes, even a pedo dev. But the combination of issues cropping up everywhere you turned meant that even if you totally resolved one issue, 10 others remained. Making this video alone, it was nearly impossible to know where to start with all the information provided. I think everything in this mod is most about context. One weird line on its own about stinky feet is a weird line. One weird line from a girl you can enslave with a mod that involves sex lizards and all sorts, and you start to draw lines. Humans love patterns. The same goes for AJ and the same goes for the Enclave jokes. Lastly, where does the mod go now? Now that TG Spy has left, I've been told that the remaining team members are interested in redoing the NCR main quest, possibly rewriting it entirely. If that will happen, and when, remains to be seen. An important note here is that Devil's Wish gave full permission for the mod team to edit his content, so at this point they're able to do what they want. There is even stuff I haven't touched on in this video, but I've tried to put out the stuff that is most relevant towards the points that are constantly talked about, and also to try and clear up misinformation. Believe me, I'll be the first to say it. The NCR's main quest story is god-awful writing. It sucks. I said it to TG's face. But, and this is something I truly, honestly believe, and it always drives me up the wall when it occurs otherwise. Hate people for what they did, not for what they didn't do. America was never underaged. If you want to hate her for being jailbait, do so. Personally, I would rather complain about May, who is written as a genuinely underage character obsessed with sex. If there's anything more, I'll answer it in the pinned comment below whenever I wake up. The main reason I made this video was to see if my position on my original review would change at all, given all the information that had come out and came to me. I don't believe it does. I do believe it means I can shift my blame to one person, that being Devil's Wish. Please, my man, trust a writer to work with you. And that honestly, I believe that this mod was doomed. That seems fucked up to say, but with this many issues surfacing so fast, as it is, I think the pedo dev was an acceleration of something that would have occurred regardless. It gave those devs who wanted out a very good excuse to leave, and it gave anyone who disliked the mod a very, very easy target. This is all my opinion, of course. I just don't ever see a team being able to work when someone adamantly refuses to work with the rest of the team. But hey, if that rewrite does come out, I'll be damn interested to see it. Maybe I'll have gotten over my fear of Fallout by that point. This has been one hell of a day, and I need some sleep. Go buy GME.